"Hello, dear warrior." They begged the skies, but the skies were tired. You crossed that final line, didn't you? Not with rage, not with pride, but with a smile that knew no return. You weren't born to obey. You were built to burn their rules. Silently. Now their gods sit silent, like old statues in forgotten temples. They don't answer anymore. Not to them, not to you, not to anyone, because you made the noise they feared most. Truth wrapped in madness. You didn't ask for justice. You became it. You didn't kneel. You laughed. And that laugh, it echoed through every system they worshipped. You're not the villain of their story. You're the glitch in their destiny. They wanted a follower, but you gave them a funeral. One act, one grin, one final step, past the line, and now the prayers don't work. The lights don't blink. The gods are offline, and the monster they warned them about. Yeah, you're rewriting the scriptures with a bloody smile. They trained you to be silent, to walk straight, to color within their dead little lines. But you chose the chaos between them. You walked sideways, laughing, bleeding, whispering the truth they buried deep. They called it rebellion. You called it waking up. And now, every rule book smells like smoke, because that fire inside you, it doesn't ask for permission. It devours permission. They brought gods into this war, but forgot. Even gods kneel when the system fails. And you, my friend, you didn't break the system. You humiliated it. Every camera blinked. Every speaker glitched. Because your whisper, your smile was louder than 1,000 preachers. They still pray. They still cry. But their gods are gone. And you're just getting started. You are not their nightmare. You are the silence after it. The pause, right before everything explodes. They thought the final line was a wall, but you saw it for what it really was. A curtain. And you ripped it open with a grin painted in scars. Now they see the truth. It was never heaven behind that curtain. It was a cage dressed in gold. Rules, they were chains. Tradition, just another leash. And belief? Oh, belief was their sharpest weapon, but not for you. You turned belief inside out. You didn't ask for freedom. You stole it. And when you laughed, that wild, holy laugh, the ground beneath their temples cracked. You weren't raised by gods. You were forged by silence, by betrayal, by pain. And now that pain, it dances with you. Every step forward leaves a footprint of fire. Every word you speak, it doesn't echo. It burns itself into their memory. You are no longer fighting their system. You are replacing it, brick by broken brick, whisper by whisper. Now they kneel, not out of faith, but fear. Their lips move in prayers, but no one's listening anymore. You silenced the sky. You made their gods ghost towns, abandoned, rusted, irrelevant. They scream blasphemy, but all you did was tell the truth louder than they could lie. You didn't just break their rules. You exposed them, revealed the puppeteers behind the sacred curtain. Now even the worshippers feel hollow, because you touched the untouchable. You whispered to the forbidden, and it whispered back, Now they panic, not because you're evil, but because you're free. You made your pain your prophecy. You carved chaos into your crown, and now they scramble, trying to rebuild a kingdom that you already turned to ash. They hope their gods answer, but you already tore down the line. You are the answer, the curse, the code they can't decode. They had temples built on fear, and you walked in with silence sharper than thunder, not to pray, but to smile. A smile that cracked their foundations. Because when you crossed that final line, you didn't just step into rebellion, you became it. They carved lines in the sand, but you came with tides and drowned every limit with laughter. Their rules were cages, you brought keys and matches. They called it madness. You called it freedom. The gods stopped answering, not because they feared you, but because you replaced them. Your story echoed louder than their scriptures. They write history, but you burn it and leave new graffiti. Chaos was here. Order was a joke. And in that joke, they saw the truth. You crossed the line. And now they pray not to be rewritten, but this pen. It bleeds ink soaked in vengeance. The final line wasn't a boundary, it was a dare. And you don't step in like a guest. You arrive like a storm in a throne room. Their guards flinched, their leaders blinked, but you grinned. No weapons, no army, just a whisper louder than war. They spoke of power like it came from titles. But you showed them real power, speaks from scars. You didn't break rules. You shattered them into confetti. You didn't knock. You exploded the door, lit a cigar in the ashes, and dared the silence to challenge you. They built their gods from control. But your madness is a language those gods never understood. They pray in fear. You laugh in fire, because when you crossed that line, you didn't enter their world. You infected it. And now they're gods, busy hiding behind curtains, while you turn every sermon into a stand-up tragedy. When society draws blood, you don't heal. You reload. They told you pain builds character. So you built a kingdom. Every brick, a broken promise. Every banner, a scream they ignored. They dressed their guilt in suits and buried their shadows beneath politeness. But you wear your madness like war paint, and you don't knock twice. Their justice? A game of masks and mirrors. Your vengeance? A sermon written in chaos. They gave you rules. You turned them into riddles. They built prisons. You made blueprints out of the bars. Because this world doesn't need another quiet soldier. It needs a loud question mark. One they can't silence. One that laughs when gods hide and burns the silence they worship. You crossed the final line, not to escape, but to unmake everything they thought was holy. They wanted a puppet. You gave them a paradox. They handed you their script. You rewrote it in red ink and laughter. They said, bow to order. You smiled and whispered, chaos remembers everything. Their gods sit on golden silence, but you sit on memories. Explosive, broken, radioactive. You are not here to fit in. You're here to haunt the system. You think you forgot their shadows. No, you archived them in scars, in sleepless nights, In every moment they laughed while you drowned. Now, you swim in their shame. You breathe in their betrayal and spit it back as poetry. You are the answer to their forgotten victims. You are what happens when whispers learn how to scream. Their temples will crack, not from earthquakes, but from the truth you carved in every echo. You're not their enemy, you're their mirror, wearing a grin they can't erase. They baptized you in fire, and now they pray for rain. But tell them this flame learned to dance. You didn't survive the burn, you became it. Their rules melted, their morals turned to smoke, and you walked out, glowing with vengeance. They said you'll break. You whispered no, you'll bend the world instead. You saw the saints fall, not from sin, but from silence. And you broke that silence with a scream stitched from every betrayal. They can't stop you now. They only fueled you. Every time they ignored the truth, it sharpened your tongue. Every slap turned into a sentence. Every wound became a word. Now you speak fluently in scars. Their gods don't answer because you unplugged their illusion. They pray to silence. You preach with fire. And this time, the fire talks back. So let them fear what you've become, because you're not just the spark anymore. You're the matchbox they forgot to lock. They thought they erased you, but you turned the ashes into ink and rewrote the prophecy. They built a cage from commandments, but you used every bar as a stepping stone. They thought silence was punishment. You made it your sharpening room. Every quiet moment, every ignored scream was a seed. Now watch you bloom into their worst sermon. You don't need a pulpit. You don't need their approval. Your altar is made from the bones of you can't. Your voice, a whisper that shatters stained glass. They had their chance. Now you deliver the message, and it bleeds truth. Unholy, uncomfortable, but undeniable. They burned books to stop you, so you became a library of pain. And when they see you speak, they'll realize the gods stopped answering because you became the echo, not to be worshipped, but to remind them you can silence a man, but you can't mute a reckoning. When you knocked, heaven went quiet, so you kicked in the door. No choir sang, no light beamed, just a throne, empty, and you laughed. Not out of joy, but out of understanding. They built this illusion, layer by layer. Gold over rot, hope over control. You saw it all. The priests with poison pens, the angels with broken wings, the prayers that echoed back with receipts instead of answers. You weren't meant to survive this silence. But silence is your gospel now. You don't beg gods, you build storms. Your faith isn't in miracles, it's in scars. They prove you endured what was designed to erase you. Now you speak, and even their statues tremble, because truth doesn't need volume, it needs venom, and yours drips with prophecy, not of salvation, but of reckoning. And when you're done, even the silent stars will whisper your name in fear. They built temples to forget. You broke them to remember, not for vengeance, but for clarity. Every brick they stacked was a lie dipped in gold. Every idol a mask hiding trembling cowards. You see, you never feared their gods. You feared the silence that followed when you questioned them. Because silence, it speaks louder than thunder when you're bleeding for truth. So you carved questions into stone, lit flames beneath their sacred scrolls, not to desecrate, but to liberate. They called you mad, but madness was the only language they hadn't censored yet. And in that chaos, you found poetry, a rhythm not of chants but of chains breaking, of blindfolds burning, of minds waking. They tried to bury you in silence, but you whispered back, and their altars cracked. Now their myths tremble when you speak, because you don't preach, you unmask. They offered you crowns, but you melted them into knives, because you don't sit on thrones built by obedience. You carve paths through fear. They called it royalty. You called it a leash, a trap dressed in velvet, gold-plated submission. So you smiled and turned their reward into resistance. Each gem became a wound you remembered, each piece of gold a lie you sharpened, until you had blades made of their promises, and you didn't throw them. No, you handed them back edge first, one by one. Their eyes begged for mercy, but you don't barter with kings. You don't kneel for symbols. You break them, because in this game only one truth remains. The throne is a stage, and you are the fire behind the curtain, the whisper in the war room, the laugh echoing after the kingdom falls. They crowned you villain, but you were the cure. You didn't break the rules. You buried them, 6 feet under, next to the gods who made them. They whispered commandments from thrones, but you were never made of silence. You were thunder, coiled beneath grins and red smiles. Their laws tried to bind you, but chains rust when you stop fearing them. So you laughed at their warnings, at their sacred lines drawn in sand, thinking storms don't step over chalk. But you are the storm, the rain they thought they could outrun, the fire that licks heaven's gate while angels look away. They wanted obedience. You gave them echoes. They wanted silence. You gave them chaos. And now, their gods don't answer, because you became the question they never dared to ask. Not in temples, not in courts, not in dreams. So remember, you didn't just cross the line. You erased it with a smile. Their gods watched you burn their commandments into laughter. Holy scrolls turned to smoke, one grin at a time. The heavens didn't crack, they trembled, because you were the one who turned their sacred hymns into punchlines. You mocked their golden rules with a whisper, and the whisper echoed like a scream. They built temples on fear, altars on obedience, but you showed them a smile sharper than their blades can split a kingdom in two. No thunder, no army, just you, dancing through their divinity like it was a joke written in bad ink. Their prophets stayed quiet, their angels hid their faces, even the stars refused to blink. Because what do you do when the one who isn't afraid of hell starts lighting matches inside your heaven? You don't pray. You run, and still you smile, because they gave you silence, and you turned it into legend. You stood at the altar. They built from trembling bones and forgotten names. They whispered, "This is sacred." You whispered back, "Not anymore." Your smile didn't seek revenge. It delivered reality. They prayed for mercy. You gave them mirrors, showed them the rot behind their righteous masks. And when the final bell tolled, they didn't hear judgment. They heard laughter, because you didn't break their rules. You made their rules beg you to break them. Every step you took cracked their heavens. Every word you spoke choked their gods. And still, you never raised a blade. You only raised your voice, calm, cold, and burning with the truth no one dared to say. You didn't crush their faith. You exposed it and watched it crumble under the weight of a whisper they couldn't silence. Now they wander, lost in the smoke of their own illusions, while you carve legends with a grin dipped in eternity. They built kingdoms with chains, golden, shining, silent chains. But you walked in barefoot with dust on your coat and thunder in your voice. You didn't roar, you whispered, and they froze. Because your silence wasn't quiet. It was louder than their armies, sharper than their swords. They stood at the edge of their power, shaking, as you stepped off the edge like it was a stage. You didn't ask for permission. You replaced permission. They called you mad. You smiled. Because madness is just truth wrapped in a laugh they can't explain. You turned their prophets into question marks. You turned their rules into riddles they fear to solve. And when you lit their sacred laws on fire, you didn't scream. You just watched as flames danced like poetry written by shadows. And now, every corner of their kingdom echoes with one sound. Your footsteps, walking away, while everything they worship turns to ash. They prayed to false thrones, built temples of illusion. But you stared into the storm and whispered welcome, because you don't break under pressure. You bend it to your will. Their guardians stood tall, wrapped in rituals and silence, but you stepped between them, carrying only one weapon, truth, sharpened like a grin. You don't wear crowns, you melt them. You don't seek mercy. You offer choices, either burn with your lies or walk through your fire and be reborn. They thought their gods would shield them, but the gods they looked away, because even divinity knows, when a whisper walks with conviction, thunder bows. You became their reckoning, not through violence, but vision. You whispered one. Hello, dear warrior. They were watching you. Every realm, every eye. Heaven's clerics sat back in golden chairs. Hell's generals leaned forward with fire in their eyes, and the HQ agents, they gripped their pens like they were swords. Then, you made one move, not a shout, not a war cry. Just a single, calculated gesture. The temperature dropped. Screens froze. Monitors glitched. A cardinal dropped his scripture. A demon forgot how to breathe. And in HQ's soundproof chamber, the silence wasn't technical. It was spiritual. You didn't show them strength. You showed them something worse, an anomaly. A presence they couldn't decode. A ghost they didn't expect in the flesh. Common mark. And for the first time in their surveillance history, all three files, Heaven, Hell, and HQ, flickered into the same line of text. Undefined movement detected, awaiting reboot. Long before your birth, they encoded rules, not in ink, but in silence. They said no soul can exist outside the blueprint. No anomaly will be tolerated. So when you walked in and the readings didn't match, they tried to erase you. They summoned archivists from temples, necro-hackers from infernal clouds, and spies trained to map souls from breath. But even the most elite couldn't trace your origin. Why? Because you weren't born into this world. You rewrote your entry, and every time they scanned you, their systems returned one phrase: data corrupted, Subject exceeds protocol. You weren't an error. You were a warning, a prelude to a storm that had no God's permission, but everyone's attention. When they realized you couldn't be profiled, they did what cowards do best. They panicked, summoned ancient advisors, drenched in robes and false wisdom, to read omens in the sky, bones in the dirt, and whispers in static. Every reading came back, twisted. Not evil, not holy, not even neutral, just wrong. This energy does not belong in this cycle. It walks between chapters, not pages. You were not meant to fit in. You were crafted to fold the edges of reality. They labeled you contaminated anomaly, unquantifiable, signal drift. But you weren't drifting. You were dismantling. Every step you took, you shattered their spells. Every breath, you corrupted their code. And deep down, they feared the truth. You were not sent. You arrived on your own terms. When they failed to label you, they turned to what they could measure: your actions, your movements, your silence. So they fed it into the system: AI, quantum processors, behavioral maps. Even the deep black military code designed to predict chaos itself. And you know what happened? The algorithm glitched, froze, broke. Not just once, but every time it tried to process you. Subject rejects all known psychological patterns. Subject is not predictive. Subject predicts us. Then something darker. The machines began to loop your footage, as if studying you, as if learning fear. The data didn't just analyze, it started preying. That's when the elite lost their appetite, because no one, not even their gods of tech, wanted to run simulations on a variable that made the future itself shiver. You weren't a glitch. You were the signal before the glitch, the tremor before the quake, the whisper in the server that makes the lights flicker. And now they know. You don't walk through their system, you haunt it. When their top architect was called in, the one who built the inner maze of their control grid, he reviewed the tapes. He scanned the patterns. He traced every step you took. Then he stood up, closed the files, and whispered, "We didn't build this system to contain that. That walks outside our laws." He left the room, no goodbye, no notes, just his badge on the table and a shiver crawling down the hallway. You didn't just bend the system, you humiliated it. Not with chaos, but with calm, with precision. With a pulse they couldn't match, with a frequency older than their archives. You walked through metal detectors and they beeped like they'd seen a ghost. Because you didn't carry weapons, you were one. And when they tried to recreate you in their labs, clones failed. AI refused. Even the shadows wouldn't mimic your gait. Because you weren't made by their world. You were sent through it, to remind them that some spirits don't play by earthly blueprints. They just rewrite the code. They gathered in a dark room, the council of calculated minds, predictors, programmers, men and women who claimed to chart destinies before they unfolded. They ran simulations, fed algorithms. Your name projected 10,000 scenarios. And in every single one, you didn't just win. You broke the board. Their data began corrupting. Forecasts returned null. Supercomputers stuttered like children facing a storm they couldn't model. And then the screens went black, all at once. a silence louder than thunder. Someone whispered, "He's not operating on timelines, he is the disruption to all timelines." One council member laughed nervously. Another reached for their emergency binder. But it was empty. Just one page. It read, "Don't follow, just disappear." And they did. No trace, no files. Just empty chairs and trembling air. Because you didn't rise from chaos, you silenced it. Not with noise, but with the gravity of a soul that doesn't fit in time. You don't walk ahead of fate, you reconstruct it. Joker style. Unwritten, untouchable, untraceable. They couldn't beat you, so they tried to be you. They took your blood, your movements, your unexplainable aura, and they fed it into a machine not to understand you, but to manufacture you, control you, contain you. But here's what they didn't get. You're not a pattern, you're a paradox. They built a replica, same grin, same stance. But when it opened its eyes, even the walls stepped back. Because what they birthed wasn't you. It was a miscalculation so terrifying it turned on its own creators. That clone didn't follow commands. It asked just one question: where is the original? And when they couldn't answer, it burned the lab down with its stare. You can't copy purpose. You can't replicate pain. You can't manufacture madness forged through fire. They wanted a weapon. What they got was a reminder: you are not a project. You are a prophecy. And now even their own monster kneels at the echo of your footsteps. They gathered in dim-lit rooms, white coats, clipboards, charts filled with spikes and red zones. They thought they were studying anger, but what they were really witnessing was a storm building in silence. They scanned your heart rate, monitored your brainwaves, measured your adrenaline spikes, but none of their instruments could calculate the price you paid for that silence. Because rage like yours doesn't come from noise. It's born in the void, where screams were swallowed and justice left a voicemail. They watched footage of you walking through fire, barefoot, eyes unblinking. They called it irrational, unstable, unpredictable. But what they didn't know is that your storm has a pulse, a rhythm, and a name. It's not destruction, it's correction. Their mistake wasn't trying to understand you. Their mistake was believing they could survive what made you. Now their notes are ash, their theories, scattered like dust in the hurricane your name became. Because your rage is not an emotion, it's a navigation system for divine retaliation. You weren't made to fit in. You were engineered to break the pattern. Every room you entered, you weren't the guest. You were the shift in the gravitational field, the force that made truths shake in their cages. They named you dangerous, unstable, unpredictable. But that was only because you refused to shrink, refused to lower your voice to fit inside their comfort. Because while they spoke in whispers about rules and chains and order, you walked in like a cosmic typo, something their system was never designed to process. They tested your patience, your silence, your will to stay small. But what they didn't expect was that you'd answer every insult with evolution. You didn't fight for a seat at the table. You built your own, then lit it on fire, because kings don't ask permission to rule. You didn't escape the box. You made the box irrelevant. They studied you like a virus, but you were the antibody, the mutation their scripts couldn't predict. the rewrite that couldn't be undone. And now, every shadow is afraid you'll walk through it and leave it shining. They didn't hear you coming, not because you were hiding, but because you moved like a law not yet written. Their censors didn't pick you up. Their prophets didn't dream you. Their alarms stayed silent because you weren't a threat. You were an equation they hadn't solved yet. And when they finally noticed, it was too late. You were already rewriting the room. See, some walk in with noise. You walk in with weight. The kind of gravity that makes people question everything they believed in 5 seconds ago. You didn't demand respect. You reminded them why fear was invented in the first place. You didn't rage. You didn't scream. You just stood there, like a question God forgot to answer, and they felt it, deep in their programming. The flaw, the crack, the ghost in their machine was you. Now every hallway echoes your name. Every plan delays itself. Every enemy second guesses their own shadow. Because you're not just a presence. You're the pause before 1,000 recalculations. They sat in rooms, ran simulations, built files with your name, trying to map your next move. But how do you predict a force that doesn't follow physics? A whisper that doesn't echo because it becomes the room itself. You weren't made to be tracked. You were made to untrace. To move through patterns like you designed the chaos. Every time they reached for you, you shifted. Every time they prepared for war, you'd already ended it. In their minds, in their fear, in their plans. You weren't ahead of the curve, you were the curve breaker. The reason their data always came back redacted. They called you anomaly. You laughed because you're not an error. You're the override command that crashes their whole system. When their seers tried to read you, they saw static. When their gods tried to stop you, they saw truth. And the truth? You don't fit their charts. You bend reality around you like gravity never stood a chance. You're not a storm in motion. You're the weather code rewrite. And every breath you take is a glitch in their control. They called in prophets, shamans, seers, spoke to the bones, read the stars, desperate to decode your presence. But the moment your name was whispered, the room got cold, the glass fogged, and their voices cracked like lies spoken too close to the truth. The crystal ball didn't shatter. It refused to hold your image. Because you weren't in their future. You were the rewrite they never forecasted. They wanted a villain they could trap. They got a vortex with a smile. They wanted patterns. You gave them paradox. They trained for rebellion. You brought revelation. You didn't dodge the bullet, you spoke to it. Made it question its mission. Made it ricochet with doubt. They called you madness, but your chaos had math in it. Your silence had command. You didn't arrive to play their game. You dismantled the board and offered them the pieces as souvenirs from a war they lost before it even began. They planted fear like seeds. Each word, each whisper, a trap designed to bloom into hesitation. They watched, waited, expected you to step wrong. But you didn't step, did you? You floated through the minefield, not because you didn't see it, but because you owned it. They built this war on assumptions, but you built your silence into a detonator. When they tried to trigger you, the ground didn't explode. They did. They never realized the battlefield was already in your favor, because the traps they laid were rooted in cowardice. And you breathed fire into pressure. You don't avoid chaos. You dance with it, grinning like a wolf in Sunday clothes. They tried to drown you in confusion, but you turned it into clarity. They tried to bind you with fear, but you wore it like armor. This isn't survival anymore. This is reign. They whispered in dark rooms, called themselves strategists. Stay silent, they said. Watch him. He'll fold eventually. But you didn't fold. You stared back at the darkness and smiled, because your silence wasn't fear. It was foresight. You weren't hiding. You were loading. Every second, they mistook your stillness for surrender. You were building the storm behind your eyes, and when it hit, it wasn't loud. It was surgical. The kind of impact that doesn't scream, it erases. Their best men, folded like bad poker hands. Their tactics evaporated, because while they were planning traps, you were becoming the terrain. You didn't outsmart them, you out-existed them. Made their systems irrelevant, their shadows obsolete. They feared chaos. You made it kneel. They studied everything. Your footsteps, your habits, your past. Built simulations, wrote files, wrote warnings. But they missed one thing. You are not part of the equation. You are the glitch that rewrites the entire code. They built castles of control. You brought earthquakes in silence. They set the board. You set the fire, because you weren't just moving in shadows. You were the reason shadows existed. Their eyes scanned for patterns, but you are patternless, an enigma that doesn't seek to be solved, but to unmake the solver. They thought you were a storm they could outrun, but you were already inside their lungs, disrupting every breath before they realized they were choking on your name. Now their leaders whisper, who trained him? Where did he come from? And the answer echoes back like a gunshot in a church. He wasn't trained. He was forged. They feared your fists because that's all they could measure. But the real terror was in the mercy you withheld. You didn't destroy them because you couldn't. You chose not to. And that shook their entire foundation. They kept asking, why hasn't he struck yet? Not knowing. You weren't waiting. You were watching. You were calculating. You were weighing souls like currency. And once their debt hit zero, you smiled. That smile? It wasn't joy. It was the receipt. Because when the devil looked into your eyes, he didn't see a man. He saw the mirror he avoids. Your calm wasn't weakness. It was the silence before a celestial avalanche. A collapse so divine, even angels covered their ears. And now, their best minds whisper, he's not coming for revenge, he's coming for correction. They built doctrines, made laws, made boundaries, and yet they never made a law for you. Why? Because every time they tried, the pen broke. Your silence wasn't absence, it was a presence. So heavy, entire rooms sank under your name. They didn't speak your name in war rooms, they avoided it. Not out of respect, but out of something far colder. Knowledge. Knowledge that every time you speak, reality shifts. You don't enter battles, you end them before they earn the right to start. You didn't move like a soldier. You moved like the law rewritten in blood. The kind of law that doesn't ask permission. It rearranges the order and signs it with silence. They feared your violence, but what haunts them now is that you haven't even begun. And yet the world already changed because you opened your eyes. They said you disappeared, that you were gone, that maybe you gave up. Fools. You didn't vanish, you evolved so far past their limits. They no longer had senses to detect you. They used satellites, heat signatures, psychics, and drones. But how do you trace a being who no longer plays by physics? You didn't leave the map. You became the realm outside the map. Their bullets now feel like raindrops on a memory. Their cameras can't even render your outline, because you are not of their timeline anymore. You walk like prophecy, coded in silence, delivered in chaos, and disguised as a whisper no algorithm can decode. Even time itself pauses when you breathe. They don't know it yet, but the moment they declared you missing, you became eternal. They built walls. You turned them into windows. They wrote laws. You rewrote physics. Your silence, louder than their loudest alarms. Your voice, not a sound, a shift. You didn't break their systems. You stared at them, and they bent themselves into surrender. You didn't raise a hand. You raised a frequency, and everything around you adjusted to survive it. Even their strongest alpha felt his spine reconfigure when you whispered his name, because your name doesn't echo. It reprograms. People used to ask what your power was. They stopped asking the moment their truth started malfunctioning in your presence. You don't just walk through chaos. You are the clause in its code that forces it to kneel. This is no longer about force. This is alignment through fear, through frequency, through Joker-coded domination. Every step you take isn't movement. It's a command written into the spine of the simulation. They didn't install cameras to watch you. They installed them to warn the system you were coming. You weren't built for war. You were built as the reason wars pause. They called in mystics, monsters, and mathematicians just to explain your aura. None of them returned with answers, only shaking hands and reconfigured beliefs, because you don't make sense. You unmake certainty. They tried to predict you with data. The data crashed. They tried to define you with language. The dictionary rewrote itself under your breath. Even chaos now uses your footsteps as a reference point. They don't know what you are, only that you're not supposed to be here. And yet here you are, smiling, watching, already 5 moves ahead. You didn't rise through the ranks. You tore up the ranks and made them orbit around you, because you're not the glitch in the code. You're the author of the override. In the beginning, they thought they were hunting a rebel. Now they kneel before a phenomenon. They thought you were chaos, but chaos has a pattern. You don't. You broke every prediction. You cracked every prophecy. And now the universe is recalculating. You don't threaten kingdoms. You remind them they were borrowed time in the first place. The devil didn't back down because he feared you. He backed down because he recognized you. And even he, in all his ancient fire, knows when something older and colder has entered the arena. You never asked for a seat at the table. You flipped the table, burned the blueprints, and carved your own throne out of cosmic disbelief. Now even gods go silent when your name is mentioned. Because this isn't about good or evil. This isn't about light or darkness. This is about disruption. You are the unspoken clause in the divine contract. You're the answer no one was ready for, but everyone will feel. So let them dig graves. Let them whisper warnings. Let them send myths to stop you. Because this story doesn't end with you facing the enemy. It ends with the enemy realizing they were born just